Hello, and welcome to the January Academy Program of the North American Unitarian Association. The NAUA is dedicated to supporting and promoting the practice of liberal religion by embracing freedom, reason, and tolerance, rooted in our commitment to the inherent worth and dignity of every person and all people. The NAUA Academy offers monthly programming on issues of concern in contemporary society from our liberal religious perspective. My name is Joyce Francis, and I'm a member of the NAUA Academy Advisory Board. I'm joining you today from Port Townsend, Washington, on the Olympic Peninsula. If you're willing, I hope you will add your own location after your name, as I have done. You can do that by clicking on the three little dots in the upper right-hand corner of your picture. If you're willing, I hope you will add that. It's always interesting to find out, as we're becoming an international organization, actually, with new participants and members joining from South America and Europe. And it's interesting to see the geographic spread of our audience. Today's presenter is David Reich, and I'm adding his spotlight. Did I manage it? Hi, David. I did that right. Welcome, David. We are delighted that you are with us and that you've offered your time to the Academy. David will be revisiting his 2010 satire, the Antiracism Trainings, which drew on his 8 years as editor of the UU World magazine from 1992 to 2000. In addition to this book, David has published articles in numerous literary journals and taught writing at Northeastern University, the University of Arkansas, and the Massachusetts State College System. David is joining us from Quincy, Massachusetts. Interviewing David will be Julie Hotard. Let me spotlight Julie. Hi, Julie.
Hey.
Julie is a retired clinical psychologist who created the Save the Seven Principles listserv, now a network of over 130 subscribers. Julie had the fortuitous introduction to David and knew instantly that she should recruit him for the Academy program. Like me, Julie is joining from Port Townsend. Thank you, Julie, for bringing David to us.
Okay, great. Thank you, Joyce. So David has agreed to tell us a little bit about his book, a bit of a summary, and then to read some selections from it. And interspersed with some of his selections he'll read, he's agreed to answer some of my curious interview questions. So this should be great. Take it away, David.
Okay, thank you, Julie. It's an honor to be with the NAUA this evening. I admire what you're doing, and I thank you for inviting me and for that introduction. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background on the passage that I'm going to read, which comes pretty much from the middle of the book. Bear with me because there's a fair amount of information that you're going to need to take in order to make full sense of the piece that the pieces that I'm going to read. The Antiracism Training takes place at the Liberal Religion Center, which is the headquarters of the Church of Universal Love and Knowledge, whose members refer to themselves as unis and are guided by 6 suggestions. And Joyce asked if I could read a couple of those just to give you a flavor of it. Suggestion 3, ostentation is vulgar and expensive, but simplicity is next to godliness. Suggestion 4, democracy is sacred. May we live in a spirit of give and take. May we never end debates until everyone present has been heard and affirmed. The novel centers around the experiences of people who are working for the national magazine that's published by the Liberal Religion Center, and one of those people is Mickey Cronenberg, who's the narrator. His boss is Donald Sykes, and a co-worker is Annie Lee Skolberg, and they'll figure in all of them will figure in the passage that I'm going to read. Also important in this passage will be a group called COPA, which is a sort of a half-baked acronym for the Committee for to Promote Anti-Racist Thought. And the head of that committee is Mal Bond, who's the LRC's anti-racism czar. The passage that I'm going to start with refers to an article that Mickey wrote for the magazine concerning the anti-racism conference sponsored by COPA, at which various people who have thoughts about race and racism presented papers, and then they had a closed door discussion and hashed some things out. Among the people at that conference were Mal Bond himself, a minister named Malika Carter, who disagrees with Mal's anti-racism formulae, and another minister named Ukuzi Michael Jackson. Ukuzi is an Afrocentric name that he's given himself, presumably to distinguish himself from the other Michael Jacksons in the world. Also mentioned in this passage are going to be the Reverend Don Pulliam, who is the president of the Liberal Religion Center, and is distinguished from Don Sykes by being referred to as Big Don as opposed to Little Don. Briefly referred to will be the Reverend Albert Louderback, who's a figure from the 19th century. He's the first Union minister of color. And also, finally, there'll be reference to the annual HOOT, which is the annual Congress of the unis of the churches, and is sort of the uni version of GA. So I'm going to start there by referring to that article that I mentioned, Mickey's report on the Milwaukee Anti-Racism Conference. Along with the text of the article, we also printed photos of the speakers in action, that is to say, the speakers speaking, which had been taken at the conference and provided to us free of charge by a seminary student who said she used to work as a newspaper photographer. Actually, we had space for 6 photos only. In other words, photos of all but 2 speakers. I told our freelance art director to leave out the photos of the 2 whites, thinking it was safer than leaving out an African American. Shortly after the issue mailed, I bumped into Mal Bond down in the men's room. We were standing side by side at the double sinks, my right elbow occasionally knocking his left as we washed and dried our hands. "I want to thank you for that piece on the conference," he said, beaming his full wattage smile on me via the blue-tinted bevel-edged mirror. "Well, thank you," I said idiotically. Mal's favorable reaction had caught me off guard. I had a hard time believing he didn't see the article for what it was, a challenge, however mild-mannered in format, to his church-wide hegemony over all things racial. "On the whole," Mal continued, "I thought you gave a fair and accurate view. One thing I should probably warn you about, though. Yakuzi's kind of PO'd about that photo you printed. He called me up from Berkeley just to voice his concern. Some of the others didn't like their photos either, but Yakuzi was the most PO'd, far and away the most PO'd. Told me he really hates that photo. Said he'd like to burn it, can't stand it at all. Mal shook his head, but continued smiling, as if in wonderment at Yakuzi's rage. Heading out of the men's room, I said, geez, I thought his photo was one of the good ones. I said it in true bewilderment, but also offhandedly and almost relieved. We could handle a complaint about a photo the way I figured it then, just so no one started screaming about the text. Back in my office, I found our latest issue among the sundry objects that occupied my desk. Just to reassure myself, I opened it to Yakuzi's photo. The photographer had caught him delivering his conference paper, The Agony of Elbert Louderback, which narrated Louderback's lifelong maltreatment by white uni churches and demanded restitution in the form of a dramatic budget hike for the Ministers of Color group, Yakuzi M. Jackson, president. At the instant of the photo, Yakuzi had reached what appeared to be a high point of emotion. Hair flying, sweat flying, saliva flying, hands stabbing the air in front of him. It made the chubby, unprepossessing Yakuzi look like a person of depth and passion. What a welcome contrast to the typically detached professorial unipulpit style, a style that had been identified by the denomination's own consultants as a primary obstacle to church growth. Yet this photo had somehow enraged its subject. A few more weeks passed. Don Sykes came to my office. He closed the door behind him and stood with legs apart, chest and stomach thrust forward, filling the tiny room with his bulk. Sweat showed in patches on his red long-sleeve shirt. It was mid-June by now, and the weather had turned hot and sticky. My window was wide open, and when Sykes arrived, I was leaning on the grimy windowsill, looking dreamily out on Beacon Street and beyond it to the Frog Pond with its kitty bacchanalia. The people of color, Sykes announced to the background hum of traffic, are unhappy with your article. I thought I detected a smile on his face, but if so, it was barely perceptible. Neither could I read his tone of voice. Was he worried, annoyed, making fun of the complainers, all three of the above? Which people of color? I don't know which ones. I just heard it this minute from Big Don, Brother Pulliam. There have been rumblings, quote unquote. Well, whoever it is, they don't have a lot they can pin on us. 90% of that article is verbatim quotations from the speakers. I didn't think to mention the photo of Yakuzi. It felt like a minor issue still, connected more with the vanity of one obscure professor than with anything essential to the article. I forgot to mention that Yakuzi is a professor at one of the seminaries. And you got the quotations in your notes, Sykes asked. I got them on tape, and the tape is right here. I knocked on a desk drawer, evoking a woody, reassuring sound. Sykes's smile, if there was one, broadened out into a sign of unambiguous good cheer. Good man, he exclaimed, clapping my shoulder with his oversized paw. Whatever the complaint is, I bet it blows over. Annual hoots coming up next month, and that means they'll all be distracted as heck. A week later, Sykes came to my office again. He closed the door behind him. The people of color are unhappy with your article. I was standing at the open window. It was hot outside and in. Fumes and downtown traffic noise wafted up from Beacon Street. Sykes was sweating heavily in his long-sleeved shirt. The moment would have been a deja vu, only this time he clearly wasn't smiling. I think we went over this last week, Don. I told him patiently. Do you have any more information yet now? I do have some more information, he said. He frowned and ran his hand across his sparse gray-white crew cut. COPA is devoting their annual meeting at the annual Hoot 3 weeks from now to your article and what they don't like about it. They want me to show up and defend our actions. You and Annalise can come too if you want, but it's not required. I'm the only one required to make an appearance. Of course I'll be there, Don. Are you kidding me? It's my story they're attacking, but what specific aspects of the story don't they like? All aspects of it, whole ball of wax. I tried to get more detail, but they weren't given any. Said they'd have a bill of particulars ready for the Hoot. Bill of particulars. I can't say I like the sound of that. Which COPA member did you talk to? The reason I ask is that Mel said he actually liked the story. And I didn't even ask him. He volunteered it. Well, he doesn't like it anymore. Mel is the one who invited me on behalf of COPA. You still have those tapes with the quotations on them? I nodded. Keep them in a safe place. He did an about face and exited the room. That's the end of that passage.
Thank you, David. Well, David, I just loved your book. I was the characters, you portrayed them so vividly, it would make a good movie, I think. And I like the humor in your book. And you really had a lot of insight into the interpersonal reactions and how they're going between people, among people. And I loved how you portrayed a lot of the abuse of power, really. And the later on, you can see that the anti-racism trainers make these statements without any truth or reason to them. And it's exactly what we're still going through today, so many of us. And so it's a valuable portrayal of that for us to look at and think about and analyze. My favorite quote from your book is here on page 45. Anti-racism training ideas seemed harsh, wrong, dangerous, divisive, reactionary. They dissipated energy, set people of goodwill against one another. That's so well stated, and we're still living through that experience now. Let me ask you right off the bat, David, why did you decide to write a novel about this experience rather than a memoir?
Well, a few reasons. I mean, the most one that I'll mention briefly is that my severance agreement with the UUA included a non-disparagement clause, and I got that revised a little bit, but I still was a little wary of representing this narrative as factual. But the other, and I think much more important, were literary reasons that I was able to tell the story in a way that might have brought out things that wouldn't have been possible in a memoir. In that often at the association, people tended to keep their mouths shut rather than speak their minds fully. And for my literary purposes, it was often important for them to speak their minds fully. It would have been very dull to have a lot of people not saying very much. So that's literary reason one. Another is just that this is a satire, and I wanted to be able to make things as poke as much fun as I could manage, and writing fiction allowed me to do that.
Wow. David, you mentioned in your book that writing the book helped you heal. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I think the distinction that you brought up in the previous question, the one between a memoir a novel is important to bring up here because the person who was healed by writing the book wasn't me. It was the narrator of the book.
Oh, okay.
Person. By the time I started writing this book, I was, 5, 6, maybe 7 years removed from that job. I had other ways of bringing in income, and had pretty much recovered from whatever trauma I experienced. And I would also say that having gone through the experience in a way was a wonderful gift because it gave me something to write about. And I'm never as happy as I am when I'm working on a piece of literary writing. So I guess that's. I guess I can't answer your question in a way that would satisfy what you're looking for, but that's my experience anyway.
Okay, thank you. You and I have discussed the common styles of coping or trying to cope with this that the people in the novel did, and certainly you and the people around you did when you were editor of UU World and going through something very similar to this. We discussed how the most common style of coping still today is that just keep your head down and your mouth shut. And people, yes, still do that. And some people do active resistance. And then Don Sykes in your book, he did a different style of coping. He just really tried to be optimistic, but then that all got shot down when the power politics came into play. So he would go from saying, "Oh, this will be fine, it'll blow over," and then back to just submitting to whatever they want to say. "Oh, give the anti-racism folks whatever they want. We just have to go along with it." So he was going back and forth, which must have been difficult for people he was supervising. Could you comment on the different coping styles and that people were using and their effects on the coper or coping attempter and on other people around them?
Coping styles. I think you described Don Sykes' coping, sort of inconsistent coping style pretty well. He'd often also say, "Oh, so-and-so was a good guy. He would never do that sort of thing to us." And of course, so-and-so usually ended up doing that sort of thing to Don and the whole rest of the magazine staff. So in that way, he was sort of Don was a frustrating leader as the captain of the ship. And to explain the variety of coping styles, I think if you look at Annalise and Mickey, they cope to a degree by out and out resistance, and a lot of the rest of the time they cope by turning what's going on into a joke, which is sort of the roots of this novel. But when you contrast that with Don, you have to remember that they had different economic situations. Don was much better compensated than his co-workers, and he also had a couple of kids in college whose tuition he was still paying, so he had a little more loose than the other two. And I think in that sense, his optimism was sort of a way of avoiding conflict and avoiding any danger of losing his position.
Okay. David, as a Jewish person, you were in a different position than some people when you were editor of the UU World, and then your main character in your book is Jewish also. And in a way that makes things easier, I'm sure, because it's not your church that's being torn apart. On the other hand, things were harder in the novel, at least for Mickey, because the head of the organization, the president of it, was taking on a Jewish persona, even though he wasn't Jewish. And then the anti-racism trainers were fine with anti-Semitism. they just they had no objection to it at all, which I'm sure was shocking. So could you tell us a little bit about your experience as a Jewish person in this environment?
Sure, and here I'll be talking about my own experience rather than what's reflected in the novel, although there are certainly, big similarities. I don't want to portray myself as a victim or someone who was targeted because of ethnicity or religion or any of that. I didn't experience that in a day-to-day sense at working at the UUA. I think there was probably some unspoken pressure of people who worked there to join the denomination, and certainly people who did, I think, may have found it easier to get promoted and so on. But in terms of the attitude toward Jewishness, I did experience a number of weird things that I guess made me uncomfortable at the time. There was this bizarre flirtation with the Nation of Islam that kept on popping up in unexpected places, and I don't want to go into detail about that, but some of it is reflected in the book, and I think the depiction of that in the book comes very close to my actual experience. And also we had the president of the association who, having starred in a high school production of Fiddler on the Roof, seemed to have decided that he was actually sort of a rabbi and would hold forth in that manner occasionally. Again, struck me as a little bit weird, but that's about all I can tell you about that. It's more inappropriateness than anything like anti-Semitism, or you could say lack of sensitivity, maybe.
Okay. In the situations that you portrayed, if you look at facts and reason and morality and even words themselves, all these things were just molded like clay into whatever shape the anti-racism ideologues wanted to put it in. And so they were doing this, just twisting reality around to fit their ideology. And some people caught on to what they were actually doing. And then other people drank the Kool-Aid and just decided that the anti-racism ideologue ideas made sense. And then others just went along, they'll just go along to get along. Can you tell me something about the motives you think inclined people to accept or reject the ideas or just go along with them, even though they don't believe them?
Yeah, I think there are emotional benefits to both of those stances, and I guess it depends, on what you're looking for as what sort of person you are and what you're looking for. I think it's notable that three people in the book who are very resistant to the anti-racism ideology are the three people who work at the magazine. Actually, there's four people who work at the magazine, because there's another person whom I haven't mentioned who comes into the picture and is very much opposed to what she's hearing. but you consider the fact that they're journalists, and that skepticism is a big part of their charge professionally, and you probably shouldn't be surprised that they're going to be very skeptical when presented with an illogical and self-contradictory set of statements, such as all whites are racist, and so on. I'm sure you all know the drill. On the other hand, I think there are other people who are less inclined to skepticism and more inclined to believe, and some of those may well accept the ideas that are being presented with. The emotional benefit that they might gain from that includes the catharsis that comes along with confessing, which is, of course, a big part of some religions, and also feeling good about yourself that you're accomplishing something and helping oppressed people. Although a skeptic would say that confessing your racism doesn't really help anyone. I think that's the breakdown.
Thank you. And you have some more readings for us now. Huh?
Yeah, I have a couple of other sections, and the section that I finished reading just before, and the two pieces that I'm going to read now are sort of one movement in the book, although they're not on consecutive pages, but they're part of the same sort of storyline. This piece that I'm going to read now takes place at the annual Hoot and at COPA's annual meeting, where the people from the magazine have been warned they're going to be presented with the bill of particulars concerning their article and what COPA found objectionable about it. Mickey has become friendly with Malika, the minister who opposed Malbon's ideology, and they're sort of sitting together near the back of the room. At the beginning of this scene, the Reverend Priscilla Benton, who's a dean at the Milwaukee Seminary that sponsored the conference, interrupts the proceedings to complain about her photo in the magazine, and that's added to Ukuizi's complaint about his photo. And then she leaves the room claiming that she has another commitment at that time. And then getting back into the program that COPA had scheduled, we have a speaker who's going to voice their objections, and he's introduced by the person who's emceeing this event as the Reverend Miguel Tijeras, who is not just an anti-racist, but a bicultural Latino anti-racist from New York City and San Juan. And he's also got a background before he was called to ministry as a graphic designer. So he's going to speak about the article, not only in terms of the content, but in terms of the way it looks. So here we go. Okay, let's get started, says the Reverend Miguel Tijeras. I brought copies of the issue that has caused all this pain, and now I want to walk you through it, looking at each error in judgment or taste through an anti-racist lens. For COPA members, get up from their chairs and pass out copies. They wear solemn expressions like ushers at a funeral. Let's start with the cover Tijera says, once all the copies are given out. What do we see? A picture of a small white country church. What could be more innocent? Am I right? But look closer and you'll see in the foreground of the picture a sign with the words, "We don't do guilt." Okay, that's very unique. We don't do guilt. This draws a lot of chuckles from the audience. They can see from his joke that he's a fair-minded guy with a self-deprecating sense of humor. But in looking through an anti-racist lens, you have to think in context. And in the context of this issue of the magazine, an unstated message is being sent. The message of resistance to the Antiracism Training program selected for us by the Board of Trustees. We don't do guilt in this context comes to mean we don't feel any guilt about our racism. As the Reverend Miguel Tijeras moves on to the letters to the editor page, I slouch in my seat, spacing out on the densely fibrous texture of the fire retardant ceiling tiles. He is saying, if I hear correctly, that two of the letters to the editor disagree explicitly with anti-racist thinking, further reinforcing the subtler message of the cover. Finally, he invites us to turn to the offending article. I don't need to turn to the article. I can easily picture it in my mind. The opening pages with title and lead on the left-hand page, the image of Jacuzzi on the right-hand page. I had to laugh when I saw this photo, says the Reverend Miguel Tijeras, emitting a disgusted laugh and shaking his head in a showy way. By now I have sat up again. Excuse me. I have sat up again, and Tijeras has moved out from behind the lectern, having taken the microphone in hand like a television talk show host. Instead of the Reverend Jacuzzi Michael Jackson, they should have captioned it, "The Dangerous Angry Black Man." It's the same old inaccurate stereotype portrayed everywhere in the media. In reality, I know Jacuzzi from back in our days at seminary, and you wouldn't want to meet a more gentle, kind soul. It raises a question in my mind. Should we be allowing our magazine to run photos of racist stereotypes? I think not, people. I think not, he says, more in sadness than anger, judging from the way he has bunched up his eyebrows and turned down the corners of his mouth. An inaccurate photograph, I mutter. Does that strike you as odd? Don't worry about it, Malika says. When the time comes, I will answer them. And here's another subtle thing, Tijeras continues, pacing the floor in front of the lectern. His shirt, a loose-fitting tropical number with a pattern of palm trees and exotic fruits, laps around his body. Look at the color they use for a screen behind the text of the article. That's what we designers call it, a screen. And in this case, it's bright yellow, the color of a caution light. It might as well be saying, watch out for these blacks. Now turn over to the next page, more photographs. They look terrible, the way Dean Benton stated. And I'm sorry to see that her pain was such that she felt she had to leave the room. I would have liked to ask her for a few more words about the way she was made to feel by having that misleading photograph sent to every member of every church all over North America. And while you're thinking about that, I want you to notice yet another error, that even though several whites spoke at the conference, only the African American speakers had their photos printed in the magazine, suggesting that anti-racism is only for African Americans, that whites can ignore it as many whites would like to do. Finally, I want to call your attention to the actual text of the article. I was never a reporter or editor, only a designer, so this may fall outside my expertise. But I understand from those who attended the conference that the article contains many factual errors. First of all, as Dean Benton said, that it failed to make it clear who sponsored the conference. Second, that it didn't report all issues raised in the papers and the closed-door discussion. Third, that it reported disagreements among the conference speakers, but in a way that implied disagreement is bad and that people of color are so untogether. He pauses to plague the audience, shaking his head and smiling a snaky little smile. So untogether that they can't even agree on an analysis. And fourth, but not least, he pauses again to scan the room, that by failing to mention any people of color other than African Americans, the article sent a final unstated message that race is a black-white dichotomy and that Native Americans, Asian Americans, Latinos, and multiracial persons don't even exist on the radar screen. So this goes on for a bit, and then Don Sykes, who is sitting up near the front of the room beneath the podium and next to Mel Bond, gives a rather mealy-mouthed defense of the magazine, and I'm going to spare you that and read the passage that follows. Mal turns to Don Sykes and says, "Thank you for that testimony. The way the two of them are squeezed in near the lectern, their faces are maybe a foot apart. It's comforting to hear that you understand something went awry. What I'd like to hear is your analysis of what that something was." Sykes takes a moment to compose an answer. Waiting, Mal puts on a droll expression and eases back a little in his chair as if to get a better perspective on him. The gesture carries a whiff of mockery and crowing. "I think we were insensitive," Sykes ventures at last, "to the cultural needs of certain readers. And what are you planning to do about it?" "Try to show more sensitivity." "That's good to hear also, but I'd like it better, and the members of COPA would like it better, if we heard you commit to publishing an anti-racist magazine." "An anti-racist magazine? Could you explain how you mean that, Mal?" "I thought you would know that already, Don. You just finished the anti-racism training, it seems like 3 months ago." "I'm sorry," says Sykes, mopping furiously. Oh, he's been sweating all through this, so he's mopping furiously at his sweat. "I'm sorry," says Sykes, mopping furiously. "Could you please explain again?" "Nothing very difficult about it, Don. An anti-racist magazine is a magazine accountable to people of color. That's what anti-racism is all about, making white power centers and white institutions accountable to those they historically oppressed and continue oppressing in many cases." Sykes considers the proposition. "Working hand in hand with your committee," he says, offering Mal his oversized paw, "I think we can make progress toward that goal." Sykes and Mal shake hands to widely scattered applause. That's when Malika springs to her feet. "I find this discussion problematic," she says. Sykes and Mal stop shaking hands. "First of all, Mal," Malika says, "to talk about making white institutions accountable to so-called colored persons is to live in Never Never Land." She looks around the room. Her wide, ironic mouth curls upward at the corners in the slightest suggestion of a smile. "To elucidate this question, I propose a thought experiment. First, can someone in the room give me the name of a white institution that's accountable to whites?" Malika scans the room. The silence drags on for 15 seconds, 30 seconds, a minute and a half. By now, smiling broadly. really, she's having the time of her life. Thus is it proven, she says finally, our institutions are dying or already dead, the ones that are hopelessly corrupt, that is. What we need at this time is not institutions. What we need is a movement. What kind of movement, calls a man in khaki shorts and a birdwatcher's hat. Thank you for asking, Malika says. What I envision is a liberation movement for the middle class. I'm still working on the details, but for anyone to whom this sounds interesting, if you come up and see me after this meeting, I will take your contact information. And now to Miguel. His analysis, I find, is fraught with peril. For now, to respect our time limitations, I will only address the worst of the perils, specifically that Miguel, in his analysis, attempted to prescribe for us a single approved way to read the disputed article. Scholars have known for decades now that there are many, many ways to read a text, as many ways as there are readers. This is really quite elementary, people. More importantly, I find that telling a reader how to read runs counter to the thrust of 500 years of liberal religious thought. Think about the Reformation, the movement in which our tradition was suckled. What was it about? The reading of texts and who had the right to interpret them. Do we really want to undo the Reformation, people? To set up a privileged class of persons who can tell us how to read and ultimately how to think? Is this the kind of future we contemplate for our liberal religious movement? It's hard to determine how people in the room are taking this. Some nod agreement, others scowl and shake their heads. Many just stare blankly, as if they're wondering what all the fuss is about and wishing they'd gone somewhere else in this time block. One more brief point and I'm finished, says Malika. I attended the Milwaukee Anti-Racism Conference and find the magazine's account to be fully in accord with my recollections and my notes. I am also satisfied with my photograph.
Okay, thank you. You described really well these Kafka traps. In case people don't know what a Kafka trap is, I put the definition of it in the chat. Basically, there's situations where at the beginning of an interaction, you're pronounced guilty, and then all kinds of evidence is looked for, and the reality is twisted every which way to find you guilty, and no evidence of your innocence is ever accepted. And so we're still going through these, you still are, and the people in your book did, and I'm sure you did when you were editor of UU World. And they're very stressful. Mickey, the main character of your book, is grinding his teeth at night. He's the place that he works is eating at him, and he says that he has a red boiling rage during these Kafka trap meetings. A past staff member tells Mickey, "Oh, whatever you can do, please, please get away from these people. You have to get away." So how did you and others deal with these Kafka traps where you were pronounced guilty of racism with no real evidence?
Well, as I said before, humor was one of the ways that we managed to stay sane. I think we turned a lot of this crazy stuff into jokes, and I think the other thing was, as you said, just getting away, and the people who are models for the characters in this book did get away. They left, and I was one of the, I was not. I'm not proud to say that I hung on longer than I probably should have, but I eventually did and said things that sort of forced the organization to get rid of me. That was healthy for all concerned, I guess.
Yeah, it seems like you and a lot of people decided the only way to win this game is not to play. That makes a lot of sense. just get away. Your character, Malika, is a really wonderful, she's my favorite character. She's in the book. She's a bright light in the story. She's so articulate and brilliant. And she comes up with these arguments that are based on history and reason and the welfare of the community. And the anti-racism trainers, of course, just ignore all that, as if she hasn't said anything worth listening to. After all these eloquent arguments, could you tell us, please, tell us something about the character Malika and why she does what she does and how that works out for herself and others?
Well, why she does what she does, I think, her motives are pure. She speaks from the heart. She's saying what she believes, and I think other people in the novel tend to think that she's right. I think she'd like to see the organization, the association, transformed in ways that don't happen in the book, and I think haven't happened apparently in real life. I think, as hinted at in the book, one of the areas in which she's weaker, I mean, put it this way, she gets a lot of pleasure from outthinking and outsmarting some of these other folks and out debating them. And she's a great tactician. She thinks on her feet very well. And she has, and she has scholarship and to back that up. But she's not as good as an organizer. She fails to organize. I mean, she finds people that are aligned with her and she commiserates with them, but she never organizes with other people to create counter structures, and thus she's kind of a voice crying in the wilderness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she could have used an organizer assistant person, since everybody can't do everything. But she had such clear vision that she was just kind of amazing, and just said, this isn't about anti-racism. This is about power and sadism, actually, taking joy out of making people squirm. So I just love that character. The anti-racism trainers in the book, we're telling people, okay, if you disagree with us, that means you're just a racist in denial. Or if you're a person of color and you disagree with us, well, that means you've got internalized racism. How did you and others around you experience these kinds of situations and accusations?
Well, I think, that you used the term Kafka traps, and this is certainly one of those. Because if you listen to what they have to say and agree with it, then then you're okay. But if you don't agree with it, they're not going to answer you in good faith. They're not going to answer your arguments in good faith. They're going to impugn your character rather than taking on your arguments directly. So it's a kind of degrading the person rather than taking on the argument. It's what do they call it? There's a term for it in logic that I don't remember, but it's basically
Ad hominem?
Yeah, there you
It's
go.
right here. in the
Yeah.
picture.
Right. Uh, uh, you know, besmirching the character of the person rather than taking on the argument.
Yeah. And last question here. Don Pulliam, the organization's president in the book, told a story about his predecessor who just burnt himself out, left office a broken man because of spending all this effort to try to keep extreme leftists from taking over the organization. Extremists who were extolling the virtues of Ho Chi Minh and the Viet Cong. And in this story, it seems to be the meaning was that Don Pulliam himself was going to burn himself out, burn himself to a crisp with all the stress of trying to keep the radical anti-racist ideologues from taking over the organization. Can you think of a way an organization like the UU Church could support how we could support our leaders well enough that they won't be burnt out from battling with extreme people who want to take over the organization?
Well, I think Don Pulliam, you know, also, you know, suffers from a failure to organize a resistance. And after all, he's the most powerful person in the organization. He ought to be able to marshal some force against people whom he essentially sees in his sort of mild-mannered, befuddled way as dangerous to the organization. But he's not inclined to do that. So, you know, if the head man isn't going to do anything, it's sort of hopeless to ask the rest of the organization to fall in behind him because he hasn't taken a stand. So I think it starts there. But again, you know, I think the answer to this stuff is organizing it against it and creating other institutions, as the NAUA is doing finally. I mean, this is something that's been going on in the denomination for many years, and you know, it's wonderful to see something finally happening of that nature.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe Don Pulliam could have used an organizer assistant just like Malika could have used one. It certainly takes a lot of people and a lot of roles to solve these problems.
I mean, it's not really a matter of having a factotum. I mean, you know, he has to supply the willpower and the understanding. Even if someone else is going to do the you know, take the steps on his behalf. And I think in the absence of you know, he's a weak leader basically, and in the absence of strength, I don't think there's much you can do.
Julie and David, I'm very impressed at how well you managed time. You managed to get everything in that you had planned, and that's fantastic. But our time has come. It's wonderful to be able to hear your reflections, looking back from another nearly 15 years after its publication. It helps me to understand how long this ideological shift in the UUA and other organizations has been going on. I look forward to the further questions from your audience. I want to ask you all for your support for the NAUA and its various activities, including these Academy presentations. Let me bring up this slide for you. Again, the NAUA supports and promotes liberal religion by embracing freedom, reason, and tolerance, rooted in our commitment to the inherent worth and dignity of every person and all people. We hope you enjoy these presentations. We hope you will be back. We hope you will look for more information about the NAUA at the website naunitariansplural.org. And if you are able and inclined to donate to the NAUA, you can go to the website, or you can use this QR code with your cell phone camera to take you to the donation page. So I hope that you will consider that and stay with us. And then the next thing I want to tell you about is the next program, the February Academy program, which I think Terry mentioned at the very beginning, is scheduled for the second Tuesday of February. And the second Tuesday is going to be our regular schedule from here on out, we hope. So the second Tuesday, February 13th, at the same time, 4:30 Pacific time, 7:30 Eastern time, join us using the same link you used today, tinyurl.com, NAUA Academy, /NAUA Academy. The February program is entitled Understanding Our Supreme Courts, plural, U.S. and Canadian Perspectives. 3 of us will be presenting. I'm going to start off sharing some data about the past year of SCOTUS, which is the acronym we use for the Supreme Court of the United States, comparing it to the other years, previous years. Then my husband, Nils Peterson, who's a U.S. attorney, will follow with reflections on the recent topical issues of the Supreme Court, namely abortion rights and judicial scandals. Lastly, Anthony Carafanini, a Canadian attorney, will share important differences in the Canadian Supreme Court, such as how their judges are appointed, how long they serve, and the major issues that the Canadian court is currently facing. So we hope to see you on February the 13th, this at 4:30 Eastern Pacific time, 7:30 Eastern time.